different system. Okay. So good evening, everyone, and good evening to the web audience. And I welcome you all. My name is Jacobson, for those that may not know. And following up, last week I discussed the topic of blind spots. And consistent with the time of the season, the time of the year that we're in, that the Hebrew calendar, which is a very psychological and mystical calendar that reflects the cycles of life. So we're now in a very unique period. The period we're in now really is an expression of the paradoxes of life, the true extremes that we all go through, the deaths and births, the ups and downs. Because in the calendar, this past Sunday was the saddest day of the Hebrew calendar, which was Tisha B'Av, a day when many tragic events took place. And as Jewish sages explain, that it's not because sad days, it's not because tragic events happen, that's why the days are sad. It's because the days are sad, that's why tragic events happen. Which means that time is a form of energy. And energy is a flow, an ebb and a flow. And as energy flows through the year, which is what we call days and seasons and different time periods, that cycle, that flow, consists of ups and downs. So therefore there's a time of the year when things are very high. Adar, the month of Adar, is considered to be a month of joy. Obviously a month like Tishrei, the holiday season. But then there's its antithesis, its alter ego, which is the time of the year that reflects the lows in life, in the cycle. And that is this month of Av that we're in right now, where it goes to the lowest point. You have the 3 weeks, the 9 days, to the lowest point called Tisha B'Av, and then the cycle begins to, the wheel continues to turn, and the mazel, the spirits, our fortune begins to rise. So as one of the Hasidic rabbis said, life is like a wheel. And like a wheel, a turning wheel, when you're on top you have to remember that it doesn't mean you'll always stay there. And when you're on the bottom you also have to remember that it doesn't mean you will stay there as well. Why is this such an important statement? Because we don't feel that. When we're riding high, we usually take it for granted. And we don't expect anything to change, which is why we make many mistakes. We don't prepare for the years of famine, which explains the greatness of Joseph. The biblical Joseph, when he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, so Pharaoh dreamt that there were 7 meager, emaciated cows, and then there were 7 fat cows. Well, it was actually the other way around. 7 fat cows that were then eaten up by 7 meager cows, 7 emaciated cows. And no one was able to interpret it, and Joseph interpreted the dream that this reflects the fact that there would be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And the 7 years of famine would swallow up the years of plenty, meaning that you would never remember that there was any plenty, which is what happens. When we are doing well, often we, as I said, take for granted, and we don't necessarily prepare. And so when famine comes, when unfortunately tragedy strikes, we're not prepared, and therefore we lose everything. So then when Joseph, after he interpreted the dream, was asked, what should we do? So he gave a piece of advice. He said, in the 7 years of plenty, stockpile enough grain that would survive and would last through the 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh and the Egyptians said, how brilliant, such a smart Jew. And they appointed him to become second in command, Mishnah Lamela, the viceroy of Egypt. However, the question begs is this: what's so brilliant about that? It's common sense. If you knew that 7 years of famine will follow, 7 years of plenty, what kind of brilliant person does it take to know that you better prepare and stockpile, put away, and reserve for the famine that would come? And it was clear they knew they did. They all accepted the interpretation. To appoint him second the viceroy of Egypt just because of this seemingly common sense piece of advice. The answer is a very simple one as well. It's one thing to know it, it's another thing to act on it. We know a lot of things in life, but it doesn't mean we act. Why do they have the concept today? Financial planners will tell you forced savings. That it has to be taken out of your bank account. Because if it's not taken out of your bank account, you're not going to end up doing it willingly. Why? Because every month you'll have another excuse. 1 month you'll say, I'll put away for 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 10 months. When it's forced, when it's automatic withdrawal, as they put it, then it gets done. You'll see everywhere in life, you make resolutions, and you are convinced that you have to do something right, and a few days after your inspiration and resolution, it dissipates. So it's not that you don't understand that you should be doing it, it makes complete sense. Of course it makes sense. The doctor tells you, listen, you may feel great today, but if you don't lose weight or you don't do something else over the years. Why is it that we all understand? It makes a lot of sense. Because when we're in the moment, we don't feel the wheel turning. We just feel the moment. We're blind, basically. Or myopic vision, narrow vision, nearsighted. So we see the moment, and emotionally that's what consumes us, and everything else is intellectual and maybe correct, but on paper. You see this all the time. Human beings consistently are acting differently than what we believe in. Even the mere word that we say we're idealistic, you have ideals. What does the word ideals mean? That they're ideals that you aspire to, but that you haven't reached. If you have reached them, they wouldn't be ideals. Nobody has lived up to all their idealism, or else it wouldn't be idealism. It would just be a given. The concept of an ideal, of a value system, means you believe in that standard, and you work toward it, but it also includes that you're not there yet. So by nature, we are human beings in a way you can say we're all a little crazy, that we can understand with our mind something completely and not necessarily act on it. As a matter of fact, we can act and do something completely self-destructive, even while we know that it's self-destructive. Explain that one. And then a moment later you realize, because you get caught up with the obsession or the passion of the moment or whatever it may be, and you lose your mind. That's what happens. Emotions have that power. I discussed it last week at length. The power of blind spots and so on. So Joseph's brilliance wasn't the advice was simple. The brilliance was to act on it, that he actually had the discipline and the plan and was able to convince a prosperous country that was thriving for 7 years that we have to remember that in 7 years from now it's not going to be the same. And he stockpiled. And because of that, he created the first superpower in history. Egypt became the Egyptian empire that we know. Because they had a monopoly on the commodity of the time called grain. Everyone needed grain. And even Jacob and his family had to come to Egypt to get the grain, which of course changed all of history. The Jews there, as a result, ended up in Egypt. They ended up being enslaved. The whole parsha, the whole chapter. So the concept of understanding that life is a cycle, a spinning wheel, as reflected in the Jewish calendar, is more than just a concept. The challenge is, of course, to act on it. So the Jewish calendar, its power is that actually in our calendar is built in a structure that is not an equilibrium, that is not a plateau. It's filled with changes, reflective of real life. Real life, and it's an illusion when life seems to be going like that. Life is never like that. It's always like this. Look at a cardiogram. What does a good, healthy heartbeat look like? If it looked like this, God forbid, that's not a good sign. A healthy heartbeat looks like that. It's contracting and expanding. A heartbeat, like a pulse. Pulsating energy. So the life itself, raw life, is dependent on the movement of an ebb and a flow. Should it become too stable, it's not life. So when we say we just want to have peace and nothing should change, that's a nice illusion. It's not reality. What you should say is God should give you the strength to ride through the cycles. That's a much more realistic prayer, because we all will have cycles. So the Hebrew calendar is structured as such. It's not meant to tell us, oh, this is a sad period in time, and cry all day. It's meant to reflect the reality of life. There's some people who love Los Angeles, and some people don't. This is not a tangential. It's relevant to our discussion. So some that don't like Los Angeles will say, the reason I don't like it is because of the weather. Those people that like it say it's also because of the weather. Now, how do you explain that? You explain it this way. The weather there is pretty stable. It's one of the most, the median temperature there is more or less the same throughout the year. Of course, fluctuations. There's a rainy season, a winter. New York, for instance, is not that way at all. New York is constantly fluctuating. Harsh summers, severe winters. But what is more natural to the human being? So going there, in a way, it's like going to paradise. I'm talking purely from the climate. I mean, forget about the smog and all that. But when it was non-existent, so in a way, it's like going to the beach and spending time on the beach all the time. But many people who are disturbed by that is because they feel it's like a plastic city. It's like superficial. It's not realistically aligned with the cycles of life. It's not taking away from any of the beauty or any of the virtues of the West Coast. I'm not here to take a vote one way or the other. You can make your choices. But there is something to be said about it. And others say that New York, on the other hand, for example, is much more aligned to those cycles. Not to say that New York doesn't have its... we're not talking about the people, of course. We're talking, again, the climate. Though I'm a hardcore New Yorker, I was born here, I'm addicted to the energy and to the New York doesn't sleep thing. And when you go to other cities, and I've traveled quite extensively, and you can't make a phone call after 9 o'clock p.m. That is, in New York, you don't make phone calls before 9 p.m. to many people, So I guess I'm somewhat subjective, a little biased. But it's not where I'm coming from here. I'm not selling New York to anybody. It's not like, we are people who would like to be in Jerusalem. Actually, Jerusalem, and even though it's not as extreme, it also fluctuates pretty much. Whereas other parts of Israel, because they're not in the mountains, it's again more stable. But the point is that life is based on cycles. So the Hebrew calendar is a gift to us, telling us here are the cycles. Align your life accordingly, and you'll learn to master the ride, so to speak. And if you try to fight it, think of a great swimmer. When you swim the waters and a storm strikes and the tide is against you, what is a good swimmer going to do? So if you're ignorant, you'll say a good swimmer just knows it's so good. He knows how to swim even in a storm. No, a good swimmer knows when not to swim and not to fight the tide and not to fight. You just let it carry you. This is true not just in physical swimming, it's true and also, I know the Olympics, so that's maybe a good metaphor. But there are no storms, it's on a pool, which is artificial. But the truth is psychologically as well, how we swim the waters of life. You'll see that people who have mastered or have that type of inner peace, it's not because they've been lucky and nothing has happened to them in their lives. It's because they know how to ride through a storm. They have the resilience, the strength, the wisdom to not to try to fight things that you cannot control. You learn how to ride through them. You learn how it seeps through you. You'll see all people who've gone through any type of healing, rehab even, 12 steps and so on, will all tell you consistently. Those that have gotten stronger through it will tell you what you learn is to surrender. That's what you learn. You learn that you're not in control of everything. Those people that think they're in control are the ones that are the most vulnerable, because life is not always going to cooperate with your plans. So it's not about, we all pray for and bless each other, we should only have pleasant and beautiful lives. That's a given. That's not the discussion. But in reality, life itself is not that simple. So the cycles of this calendar are about a mirror image of our own cycles. And understanding it is all about the wheel. So in this period in time, we have these two extremes as well. What do we have? The saddest day in the calendar was this past Sunday. And it leads right into 6 days later, is called the 15th of Av, which will be Shabbos. called the happiest day in the calendar. Not like Purim, it says, well, there are no holidays like the holiday of Yom Kippur and Chamisha Asar B'Av. So Yom Kippur, as the Mishnah and the Talmud explain, is understandable. Why? Because Yom Kippur is Yom Slicha Kapara. It's a day when we are forgiven for all. It's like a clean slate. It's a day when Moses prevailed over God to allow human beings the birth of hope, as I've often explained here. But what's the 15th of Av? Some obscure day. So the Talmud at the end of the Tractate of Tainis goes through a whole elaborate explanations and reasons and many reasons of what happened on the 15th of Av. But it's still always, it almost seems forced. You're trying to dig out some reason that the 15th of Av is a special day. So they're all legitimate reasons, but it's still not so obvious. So the Holy Arizal explains that the 15th of Av is a full moon. Now there are 12 full moons in the year, or in a leap year 13. And the full moon is usually reflective of a full slate of blessings. That's why Passover is on the full moon, Sukkot is on the full moon, Purim is on the full moon. So what so special he asks about the 15th of Av? So he says because the full moon that follows, he puts it, the destruction of the moon, destruction of the temple in the 9th, so in direct proportion to the descent is the Great Ascent. So the other days, months of the year, this ascent of the moon is nice, but it's not necessarily coming after a deep low. Whereas in this month, the 15th of Av follows that deep low. In other words, the cycle again, the wheel. Then the lower the wheel turns, the lower it reaches, the higher it can climb. And you see this consistently. The concept is called, if you want to know the title for it in mystical and Hasidic teachings, it's called Yerida Tzerech Aliyah, which literally means, translated, is the descent is in order to achieve an ascent. But it has much more meaning than just that translation. You'll see in life that the farther you want to reach, the deeper you have to go. So take an archer. To shoot an arrow to the farthest possible place, what do you have to do? You have to pull back the farthest possible back. So in other words, you have to go all the way back in order to go all the way forward. Think of a stone wall. If you come to a stone wall and you see some stones on the ground, and they're scattered on the ground, and you know they fell from the wall, and you try to wonder which stones came from the highest part of the wall. Which ones will it be? The ones that are farthest from the wall. The greater something is, the farther it can fall. The stones that are lower in the wall will only fall nearby. If they're high up, they'll fall far apart. In psychological terminology, this is also true. The greater the strength, the more damage it can do. You see this in history. People who've done the greatest damage had great power. They're able to mesmerize others and cause great destruction. The Talmud says, Kol hagadol mechaveri yitzre gadol mimenu. The greater the person, the greater the yetzer hara he has, or she. The greater the person, the greater the evil inclination. Now, simply the reason for that is because when there's a lot of energy can go two ways. A small little flame can only do that much damage, and it could also only warm or illuminate that much. A larger flame can illuminate and warm a lot larger area, but it can cause also a lot of damage. Nuclear energy, atomic energy, nuclear energy can do a lot more damage than regular energy, but it also can do a lot greater good. So it's like potent power. Potency goes two ways. The mystics explain, or using the verse from Ecclesiastes, from King Solomon, he writes, Zelu umazeh asa lakim, that God created the world like parallel worlds. He created this against this. Everything that exists on one end of positive exists in the negative. Why did he do that? It's not just to create a mirror image, because it also creates a balance, because they balance each other out. It also gives us the ability to have free will. But above all, it's truly reflective of reality of life, the cosmic cycle that I'm referring to. That it is a wheel that turns, and that's what makes life so rich, and that also is what makes life so challenging. So if a person says, I prefer to just have a status quo, a static situation. So yes, let's say for a moment it's a happy state of being. So you say, I wish I could hold on to this moment the rest of my life. It's a good wish. What will happen, do you think? What will happen is we will not be able to continue, won't be able to continue to feed us and nourish us. As they say, this is the expression in Hebrew, tainuk tmidi, ein a tainuk. Consistent pleasure is not pleasure. Pleasure, by definition, means that it's not consistent, that it's a novelty, that it happens once in a while. If it becomes too common, it loses its allure. Now, why is that the case? It's because we, by nature, human beings, are always changing. So if you just had the same thing all the time, it's really the sign, I don't want to use the word, of death. Death doesn't change. Life, like I said, energy is pulsating all the time. The ups and the downs. There's the contraction and expansion of the heart, the heartbeat. There's the breath, in and out, exhaling and inhaling. It's the stuff that life is made of is movement. And movement is healthy. Movement, of course, also has the risk that it may take you to a place that's not so great. So that's about riding the wheel, riding the cycle, understanding that it is a movement. And it's when a person begins to feel that in their gut is when they begin to take control of their lives. Really, I wouldn't say that word. I'd say when you're ready to relinquish control, is that's when you'll get control. When you're ready to realize that there are other forces that are going to lead your way, not you, they, that's when you begin to get control. Because you realize it's not about you, it's about how you're going to ride these waves. So that's what this cycle of life is all about. And that's what this period in the year is about. So last week we discussed blind spots. Appropriately to Tisha B'Av, they have the blind spots. When there's darkness, we don't see clearly. We're subjective. And I discussed some of the methods, or the main method of how one gets beyond blind spots is that you must have someone else to trust. What I'd like to address as a so-called sequel to part 2 of last week's discussion, so even if you haven't been here, it's still a self-contained class, but if you are here, you'll see the connection, is that there's another element that allows a person to get beyond their own blind spots. Because if you recall the question, which is the obvious conundrum, if it's a blind spot, how could you ever get beyond it? It's your blind spot. As soon as you get beyond it, it means it wasn't a blind spot. You cannot see your blind spots. That's the point. So another can help you see it, just as I mentioned, let's say the blind spot when you're driving a car. Someone else can look at something because they have a different vantage point, a different context, so they can help you. So that's how we help each other. You help me, I help you. I have my blind spots, you have yours. But your blind spots are not mine, so I can help you perhaps identify, or even if you cannot identify, you better be careful. Because it's an area where you're vulnerable or you're sensitive to. So if we listen to each other and we truly have that humility, it's a great asset to be able to have friends that can help you identify things. You know this area, the area you always need to consult with someone because you may be too weak, too subjective, or you've been hurt, or just your personality doesn't get this type of, some people just don't have business instincts. Other people don't have other instincts. Now we all have our strengths and our weaknesses. There's nothing wrong with that. And of course it's actually freeing to know this. Because as we all know, one of the greatest problems is not the problem we have, it's the cover-up, it's the denial we have. If we were all able to identify, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, just like we can identify our ups and downs, then fine, it's like a road on a highway. You have a map, the map tells you here are the dips and the what's the opposite of dips, whatever, the valleys and the mountains, and you drive accordingly. Nothing wrong. If you're able to see yourself in the same context, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. And when it comes to weaknesses, you need a support from others. And you may have blind spots, you may have other things that need to compensate. And strengths are your strengths. Then nothing wrong with that. Everyone understands. We're not supposed to be superhuman beings. So why is it that we have such problems? It seems so good on paper. The reason we have problems is, number one is, we don't always know what those weaknesses and strengths are. So when you're left guessing, you become confused by your guessing. It's not like a map. If you had a road map that told you, here are the roads, you're coming to a very sharp turn here, be careful. It's one thing. In life we don't have that, so to speak. The second thing, maybe even more important, is that as we grow up as children, if we don't have healthy parents who reinforce us and build our confidence, and they almost like make you feel ashamed about your weaknesses, then it's no longer just a weakness. Now it's a whole issue of pride and shame. So you begin to say, tragically, I hear this too often, where adults tell me that they would come home from school and that they didn't get the right mark, or they didn't live up to their father or mother's expectation. They were punished. Not necessarily physically punished by disgust, which is even sometimes worse than any type of abuse, where a parent makes you feel like you're worthless. And what happens is you get a distortion. Instead of a parent saying to you, listen, you have our strengths and weaknesses, I have them, you have them, and we have to learn how to compensate for them. They make you feel ashamed of your weakness, so you start covering up and say, hey, I don't have that weakness. As someone says, your arrogance begins to conceal your ignorance. So you create a whole distorted way of how to cope with challenges. Instead of someone simply directing you in the young formative years and saying, listen, we all fall sometimes, and we all have our strengths, and we have to learn how to manage it. So basically, insecure parents create insecure children. And once you become insecure, it's no longer just this black and white, I have strengths and weaknesses, here's an up, here's a down in my life. Now it becomes a whole distorted way of how you handle it, and you're ashamed of it, and you cover up, and you don't acknowledge it. So now that's no longer just a weakness. Now it's a whole distortion. Does this resonate with anybody in this room? Okay. That's how it is. No.
We'd agree, we wouldn't be in the know.
Okay. And then this just gets more and more elaborate. That we start putting on masks, and we go to work, and we have our friends, and we create an image we think is the one that we should have, but it's not necessarily even who you are. It's an image that may have been imposed upon you. Others may have insisted. Your own distorted way of thinking what would make people happy. You begin to become a pleasers, pleasing others. Your life is defined by pleasing others. And then when that gets unbearable, you turn on another character, identity. This is called identity crisis. You've heard that word. Who am I? As opposed to what others have done to shape me. And once you're there, it's no longer just this black and white, okay, this cycle of life. I have ups and downs, I have strengths and weaknesses, and I have to learn to just maneuver. That would be nice, but now our tools have been distorted. So even talking about strengths and weaknesses is no longer just a plain discussion. How many people are just willing to say, hey, this is my strength, these are my weaknesses? How many people can't even make that statement? So we spend hours in therapy and thousands upon dollars to hopefully try to get someone else to help us identify what our problems are. It's not even about healing from them. It's first finding out what they are. Some people go to therapy just to have someone to listen that will listen to them. And it's worth $150 an hour or more. Is that cheap or what? I don't know. Some people are desperate. I'm not suggesting therapy doesn't help. Good therapy absolutely helps. That's called having an objective voice that listens and can help you identify. So the mess is quite complex. We've traveled and wandered very far from who we were as children when things were much, much simpler. Because had this been nipped in the bud, had we as children been able to identify, here's the problem. The problem is not me, the problem is a parent or an educator or an adult who's got a problem. And if adults would understand the responsibility of how they can screw up people's lives, or even worse than that, we'd have a different world. But this is the darkness of this world. So when we talk about a calendar, it's not just a nice thing, a calendar, the Hebrew calendar, it's actually a backdrop for you to look at. You know, when you teach someone, let's say, art or music, I don't know if they actually do this, but it would be a good idea if this was done. And I try to use it in all my teaching. You always want to give someone a context. Because without context, there's nowhere to grow. What do I mean by that? Let's say you want to draw a circle. So nobody can draw a perfect circle on paper, But let's say you never saw a perfect circle in the first place. What kind of circle are you going to draw? So let's say you're teaching someone art, you show them what the masters have mastered, the classic artists, the best in history. Now this student, the art student, may never come to that point of being a master like a Michelangelo or Van Gogh or some other great artist. But by seeing it, you have context. You see what's possible. So number one is you don't create a distortion and think you're there already. Number two, you have a destination to try to reach toward. Say, here's a standard. Is it a perfect standard? Listen, no, there's no such thing as a perfect artist. But it's a standard. So if you have a perfect circle, then you can draw a circle, and you juxtapose it on the perfect one. You can say, now I see my circle's a little jagged, a little cut. You have context. Same thing in music. You listen to the best music ever created. So then you try to create your own music, and you see. It may be embarrassing. As a writer, you read sometimes, I read the classics, I read authors that just, blow you away, their ability to write. You're embarrassed, actually, when you read it. You see, you never feel you could ever reach a place like that. But it's not about being embarrassed, it's putting things in context. This is a standard. So the Torah offers us the same type of template, a type of backdrop. You have a backdrop of what it means to be a true mensch, what it means to be psychologically healthy, balanced, living a harmonious life. It's not meant to make us feel bad we don't have it. It's meant for us, on the contrary, to have something to grow toward. This is the destination. This is what we read about and told about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Why is it relevant to us to know? This isn't just a history book about knowing our ancestry. It's relevant to our lives. Because you have a model of chesed in Abraham, you have a model of gvura in Isaac, and a model of tiferes, compassion and balance in Jacob. And the list goes on. Every character in the Torah is a archetype of what it means, or what we are possible, what's possible for us to reach, our possibilities. So firstly, it gives you hope. You see what we're capable of. Because if they were capable, and they're our grandfathers and grandmothers, why shouldn't we be capable? And secondly, it puts things in context. You have a context. And thirdly, you don't create distortion that think you're there already. You have true standard to look at, to look up to. This is why we have the calendar. So no matter how messed up your life became, meaning once your tools are undermined, and I want to embellish a little on that, a little elaborate. As I said earlier, it's one thing if you know you have strengths, you have weaknesses, you have cycles in life. Like I used the metaphor before, driving on a road. If you're a good driver, you're not drive a car, or for that matter a swimmer. So all you need really to get from here to there requires a vehicle that works, I should add, a road map, and of course the skills that you have to drive. So you follow the roadmap. The roadmap tells you don't go here, go here. It tells you here are very sharp twists and turns, be careful. And you're going to get from where you have to go. And you're a good driver, you know where to drive slower, where to go faster. As I said before, a good swimmer doesn't mean someone that knows how to overcome every storm and every tide. On the contrary, a good swimmer knows when not to swim, when to stop and surrender and let the water carry you. And then when the water's calm, then you exert. You have to know when to move and when to stop. It's a simple process of gas and brakes. Why psychologically are we unable to do that? As I said, because there are forces that shape our tools themselves. Imagine you potentially can drive. You have a roadmap, but somebody's holding your hand when you're driving the wheel, or somebody's pressing on the gas and you want to push on the brakes. Parental influences, the forces of educational forces, peer pressure, distorts or weakens our ability to access our own tools. So number one, you never really learn how to drive. You never learn the confidence that you need to drive. Number two, even if you have the tools, someone could be holding your hand. If you had an overbearing mother or father who criticized everything you did, the rest of your life you're going to be haunted every time a challenge comes your way. Maybe you're going to make a mistake. Because as a child, that's what's left in the impression that I'm not competent. By contrast, a healthy parent tells you can accomplish everything. That doesn't mean unrealistically. It means if you choose to go, but you have the tools to do so. So you don't have anyone holding your hand when you're 30, 40, 50 years old from your childhood that's stopping you from driving, stopping you from figuring it out. So our tools get distorted and our ability to use the tools we were blessed with. There are people I meet that are extremely talented, but they don't have the confidence to do anything with it because it was destroyed. I can't say destroyed, it was knocked out of them. Whenever they tried something, they were either laughed at, dismissed, often by insecure people around them, of course. Secure people never do that. As I said, insecure parents will always breed insecure children. Show me an exception to that, and I'll give you what do we give them? A prize. Whatever, we'll figure it out. You know what I mean. Now that doesn't mean we're doomed or destined. It just means that's the plate we're given, and we can overcome it. And there are ways to overcome it. But naturally, that's what's going to happen, because insecure people create environments that are insecure. So you grew up with an insecure world around you. So that's your standard. You don't even know there's a secure thing. I know people who told me that they don't think there's such a thing as a secure person in this world. I have to agree with them to a certain extent because it's hard to meet real, truly secure people. Now, how do you meet someone that's secure? You can't ask people because very few insecure people are going to tell you, yes, I'm insecure. Now, some will, especially those that are more honest and are growing and trying to get beyond it. But not everyone will tell. Let's put it this way: the people who tell you they're insecure, they're probably insecure. Not just because somebody tells you they're secure doesn't mean they're secure. Because it's a nice thing to say. You know, I have people tell me, I'm one of them. I say to them, you ever think you're a little insecure? They say, all my friends tell me I'm the most secure person they know. I know whenever you hear that, it's trouble. Because you're talking about a person who's convinced themselves they're secure when their whole body language and every move they make is about insecurity. I'm not going to ask you what you think, so don't worry. And if you are worrying, you can probably figure out which category you're in. So, the point is, we live in an insecure world. That's true. Kol hadrachim b'cheskes sakana. The Talmud says, all the paths, as I use that metaphor of a car and roads, all the paths of lives are in a chazaka. They are presumed to be dangerous. What that means is, because you don't know what's coming next. But, what's the other side of the coin? Is that we were blessed, which means we're not asked to do something except if it was in our capacity to do so. That means we're blessed with the tools and we're blessed with the resources to overcome these challenges and these dangers, and to know when to stop and when to move and so on. So studying the Hebrew calendar, the cycle of Tisha B'Av, from the low to the high, is about understanding the wheel of life as it spins, as it turns. The Galgal HaChezer, as it's called. Literally means the wheel that returns. It means it's always spinning. And that when you're on top, you can rest assured that it's going to spin. And when you're on the bottom, you can also rest assured. And I said it's one thing to know it on paper, it's another thing to act on it. So to continue where I left off last week about blind spots, I would say as we come out of Tisha B'Av and we now begin the ascent, as the Arizal says, you read the Tzorech Aliyah, that in direct proportion to the descent comes the ascent, which is why the 15th of Av is such a great holiday. Because it comes the full moon that follows the destruction of the moon. The moon in Kabbalah is Malchus. The temple, Malchus, was compromised. So the full moon that continues, that follows, is considered to be such a great ascent. So it's appropriate now to think in terms of getting beyond the blind spots. And as you see, it only accelerates. From the 15th of Av, which the Muktzah writes, that is a gematria of K'siv v'Chasim Teva, Chamisha Sabav. That's why some Jews begin to wish each other a blessed new year. K'siv v'Chasim Teva, you should be written and sealed for a good year. beginning already Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, this Shabbos. Why? It's still a month and a half before Rosh Hashanah. Because the birth of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, is born in the ashes of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the temple. Which tells us that it's not just a cycle and a wheel that turns, that within, embedded in the lowest point of our lives lies the highest. The Shalosh says as follows: every month has its mazel, as its so-called sign. What's the mazel of the month of Av? It's Leo, the lion, Aryeh. Aryeh is an acronym, the Shalosh writes, of Elul. Aryeh is 4 letters: Aleph, Resh, Yud, Hey. Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Hashanah Rabbah. In other words, the power of Elul, which is the month of Psula, of Virgo, of love. Anila Deidi V'Deidi Li, the acronym of Elul. And Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, and Hashanah Rabbah, which is like the conclusion of the Piskei Tov of the Blessed New Year, is all made up of the letters of the month of Av, which is the saddest month of the year. What's the logic of that? So you hear again, you see the beauty, the eloquence of the Hebrew calendar, that it's all a cycle of life. There's no such thing as just sad and the compartmentalized and then there's happy. The greatest things are born in the saddest moments. The Medrash says, and this is why the Arizal Rai says, on Tisha B'Av in the afternoon we say a prayer called Knockem. Knockem is a very powerful prayer of consolation. The Arizal says why? Because Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. In the throes when the fires were highest, consuming the temple, Neilad Mashiach Shal Yisrael, the Redeemer was born. Because redemption is born in darkness. Where was Moses born? In the darkness of Egypt. We don't see it at the time. Rabbi Akiva sees it. Most of us don't see it. So that's the cycle. It's not just a cycle, it's all embedded in one another. So the Yalkut Shmeini says, another Medrash says, that in the same month, Yovi Aryeh, the Aryeh came, the lion came, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, compared to a lion, came in the month of the lion to destroy the lion, because the Beis HaMikdash is sometimes compared to a lion, because the fire that entered had the shape and strength of a lion. In that same month will come the lion, Aryeh talking about God, compared to a lion, in the month of the lion, and will rebuild the lion, the temple. So you see the concept what I discussed earlier, Zela Umazeh, the two mirror image, that the same negative energy can be transformed into positive. That's why the prophet says, Yehafchu Yomim Elu. Zechariah says that these days shall be transformed from days of mourning and grief to days of great joy. Why would it transform? Why not just say that should end and we move on? We start now to celebrate. Because that's not enough. You have to redeem it. Yehafchu. The same day that caused anguish has to be a day that causes joy. So this is the cycle that is part of our lives, and it helps us align ourselves and understand that this is also how we go through life. So the birth of Elul, as I said, and the high holidays, is all born now in this period of time, the saddest moments, and within the darkness. And psychologically, this is also true, that strength that a person has, you see people who come through difficult things, the strength is not born once they heal. The strength is born when they were weak and down. There was something inside of them that gave birth, that was like a seed of hope and of growth that allowed them to overcome the greatest challenges. That's called transformation. So how does a person then get to a place like that? If, as I said earlier, we all have this myopic vision, blind spots, and even if we understand that the cycles are, this is a wheel, but the fact is when you are at your heights, you really cannot envision, and it's hard for you psychologically to accept that this wheel turns. And when you're at your depths, you see people depressed. They do nothing you'll tell them. They'll say, listen, life is a cycle, it will move. It helps. You get paralyzed. So even though intellectually, philosophically, it makes sense that it's all a cycle that spins, and we see it all around. As I said, life itself is a wheel. You don't need any proof. Just listen to your heartbeat. Listen to your breath. It's all about movement. Exhale, inhale. The heart is not, as I said, it's not a plateau like that. It's like this. It's constant movement from one extreme to the next. So it makes sense to us. We live it. Life is made of movement. Yet something about us psychologically does not necessarily live by that. You can't just expect that when you're going to be in a dark moment, you could just say, hey, you know what? It's not going to last. So what really allows us to get beyond our own narrow vision, our own being consumed with a moment, that can allow us to free ourselves? So last week I discussed the idea of aseh l'charav, the concept of turning to another. That if we all saw each other as like a symbiotic entity, which means that your blind spots can be covered by me, and my blind spots can be covered by you, because we all have weaknesses, but others can compensate. And you turn to someone when you know there's a weak place, or you know that certain areas you just memorize it, and you remember, register, this is an area I must turn to someone else because I have a blind spot. That's what I discussed last week. I want to add to that a very fundamental element. The concept of aseh l'charav, which means literally appoint for yourself a mentor and acquire a friend. Of course, in the literal sense of the word, it means a human being, another person. You may be blinded, so as I discussed last week, you consult with someone else. As we do all the time when it comes to things of financial or other matters, you go to someone that's a bigger expert than you are. You want to rebuild your house, you're usually not going to do it on your own. You're going to go to an expert. Because you know very clearly that not only do you have blind spots, the whole thing may be blind to you. Meaning it's not your area of expertise. You go to someone that's an expert. And we do this whether it's paying your taxes, whether it's in other fields, medicine, turn to doctors. This is something we all constantly are doing, turning to others that know better. Obviously, in the psychological and personal arena, it's the hardest thing to do, especially if you think there's a stigma associated with it. People will think about things and they'll badmouth you or they'll give you a bad name, etc. But there's also a deeper element of aseh l'charav, which is more important even in a way. Because what if this was so simple, why don't we all have mentors and find experts that can help us? So the obvious answer, I'm sure everyone will say here, is because you can't find anyone you can trust. You tried. You talked to different people. In the beginning you thought, here's the right person. And they end up disappointing you. Either disappointing you, misleading you, intentionally, unintentionally. It's not even relevant if it's intentional. Obviously, if it's malicious, it's really terrible. Because then you start losing hope in the people that so-called mentors. Or you realize you thought a person who like really knew Torah or something like that should have been an expert, and you realize they're imbecile when it comes to common sense and psychological issues. You can have that too. Maimonides writes, when you go to a Rav, he writes, to be a rabbi, Sedron and Sanhedrin, which is the Supreme Court of Jewish law. So he writes different criteria. If you look there, he says, before he says that someone who knows Torah, it says someone who has wisdom, common sense, Chochem. Common sense, without Torah, without common sense, meaning knowledge of Torah, without common sense, can also be quite distorting. Because you can think, here's a person who has so much in his mind, so much in his head, studied so much, seemingly someone that would represent the Torah's wisdom and sensitivity to life. It's not always the case, because you can stuff into a mind a lot of great wisdom, but doesn't mean you can, as they say, a cup kemenish tarufstal. In Yiddish, it means you can't put a head onto somebody. There's a story they tell that there was before my days, but I was one Purim in the 60s. In Purim, there's a concept of kol ha-peshet yad nesin, which means anyone who stretches out their hand, you give them. Literally referring to someone who needy person. But it has other meanings as well. So at the end of a Farbrengen, the Rebbe made the statement that anyone kol ha-peshet not nesin, which he meant he's going to give l'chaim to everyone who sticks out their hand. So of course it became a big mayhem. Everybody came running with their cups to get l'chaim from the Rebbe. was a real, as I said, almost chaotic. And then there was one kid, a teenager, who came by and said to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said to him, "Didn't you get it ready?" So he said, "Yeah, but he had a lochen cup. He had a hole in his cup. A cup in Yiddish, a cup is a cup. This is a cup, but a cup is also here." So the Rebbe said to him, "Mahat lochen cup, was it helfen geben my zweiten Mal?" Which means if you have a hole in your cup, how will it help if you get a second time? So literally, you can say if you have a hole in your cup, it's going to pour. Obviously, so he answered. He said that he got another cup. Obviously, the Rebbe wasn't talking about the physical cup. So the concept of a cup is that common sense is not a simple thing. You can learn yeshiva all your life and not necessarily acquire common sense. Which, by the way, is what the Talmud says. The Talmud says you shouldn't appoint the mayor of a city a Talmud Chacham. That's what it says. Reish Masi should not be a Talmud Chacham. Shouldn't be a scholar. So the question is asked, what do you mean? Who else? Should be an ignoramus? An amoritz, an ignoramus? And the answer given, of course, we're talking about a scholar, the Asar Batlanim, the 10 so-called scholars of the city. They live in their minds. They live in the heavens. To run a city, you need to be practical. And not everybody who's a scholar, who has cognitive strengths, is always practical. As a matter of fact, many are not. This is not a criticism, it's just a reality. If everyone knew that, then we'd be no problem. The problem is when people misrepresent and they think just because they have certain strengths, that means they have all the strengths. I love when people are not practical and says that they're very practical. You ever meet anyone like that? They say, I'm one of the most practical people, Like, so who determined that? You? Anybody else who agrees? So to go back, so one of the reasons, the primary reasons why we would say we can't fulfill the seemingly such a commonsensical advice, appoint yourself a mentor to help you get beyond your blind spots, to go beyond yourself. So the good reason, and I'm not saying it's illegitimate, the legitimate reason is that we can't find people we can trust. And then, of course, there are people who break confidences. You share with them and suddenly it's on a blog somewhere. I don't mean necessarily literally. It could be, there's different types of blogs. In other words, it's a disrespectful thing that people feel that they can, and you hear that so-called mentors sharing with each other, I don't know if it's jokes, but certain condescension, etc. There are many, many reasons and many disappointments, unfortunately more than we deserve in that area. So that's true, that's a good excuse, but still the fact is the mission of the Torah says that we should appoint ourselves. That means God will not ask us to do something we don't have the power to do. We have to continue looking. You don't have an excuse to stop looking. You could say I've been disappointed, but to stop there would not be healthy. It's undermining yourself. But there's even a more fundamental issue. As I said earlier, on paper it makes a lot of sense that we should go turn to someone when we have a blind spot. But in action it's not that simple. Beyond the fact that we may not find someone to trust or other external reasons like that, is there's also in us there's a resistance. You don't want to necessarily look bad. Maybe go a little even more subtle. You don't even think that you look that bad, so you minimize what your problem is. Or for what many people do is they find another problem that's a smokescreen for the real problem, not even intentionally. I can say unequivocally, my limited experience, that I would say 95% of problems that people say are problems are not the real problem. They're symptoms of the problem. They're not necessarily not a problem, but they're not the root of the problem. And it's not because the people are malicious or hiding it or are not telling the truth. No, they themselves do not know. Symptoms we can recognize. You come to a doctor, you say, my finger is hurting, stomach is hurting, I have a headache. That's a legitimate thing. And you're going to a doctor to find out what the cause is. You can't be expected always to know the cause. The doctor asks you some questions. Maybe you can dig up the cause. So we usually respond to symptoms, and that's how we identify problems. Psychologically, this is also true. You can say, my life is not working. I'm trying to find a shidduch, and something is wrong, it's not working. Or there's other things. I'm constantly finding the wrong friends. So that's a symptom.
And that symptom can play itself out in many ways, and a legitimate symptom. But obviously it's not the root of the problem. It's not because you have bad friends, that's why you have problems. It's because you have problems, that's why you have bad friends. That's why you're choosing bad friends. And so on and so forth. So an objective person can help illuminate or probe. As I mentioned many times here, no one is going to solve your problem. A healthy person, a healthy mentor, the best they will do is help you find your own answers. Because ultimately the answer has to come from you. What an outside person can do is help shine the light, focus, say this is maybe not the area to look at. You have to look here, look here, look here. Yet, as I said, still so few of us really go and reach until maybe we're desperate, because we ourselves are not aware. That's part of the blind spot. And that goes back to that conundrum. If you have a blind spot, how can you overcome a blind spot? You don't even know you have it, or you don't know where it is. So the place that you should be going to search for a mentor or a friend is a place you don't go because you don't even know you should be going, or you minimize the issue. So here's where I want to address a more fundamental point in this, and that is the concept of, we call it Kabbalah Ol, Kabbalah's Oil. In English, it's hard to translate what it means. Literally, it means to accept the yoke. But what it means a lot more than that. It means, it's almost like, I don't like the word surrender because it has very negative connotations in our day and age. You know, who surrenders? Weak people surrender. The enemy surrenders. Whoever is vanquished surrenders. Resigns in chess. Or surrenders in other situations. But there's also a positive element of surrender that comes from strength. Where you recognize, as I said earlier, a good swimmer recognizes, it's not surrendering, that now there's a storm and you better not try to fight it. Because if you fight it, you're going to lose your strength. Ride with it. You have a dilemma, learn how to work through it, not necessarily always fight your enemy head on. It's the art of diplomacy sometimes. How many wars could have been prevented had someone had swallowed their pride and been a little humble and allowed, not in principle to show that I'm not going to accept it, but diffuse it with a simple few words or few terms. One simple thing, for example. If you're going to break news on a competitor or anyone that you know is going to be upset about something you're going to do, one of the simplest solutions, I can't say complete solution, but major diffuser of the problem, is you call that person and you let them know before the public knows. Because when people hear something in the street, the fury that it creates is almost impossible to ever reverse. They never forget that in a sense they were betrayed, so to speak, in their mind, even if it's not true. You call someone up and you say, listen, I'd like to tell you something. It may not be something you like so much, but what it does is it takes off the sting of hearing it like in the street or on the phone or you read it in a newspaper. It's common, but many people don't do it because either they're uncomfortable to make that call, or because pride or principle, or say, the hell with that person, doesn't like it, let him, he did enough damage to me. It's just a small example. There are thousands of such examples where if you're wise, you take several steps ahead. What does it all come down to? A certain humility. Not allowing your so-called ambition, your competitive fire, your wish to win, to be more powerful than to get the job done. If the job was more powerful than you and your ego, most cases, most wars could be prevented. Obviously, it's not always us. It takes two to tango. There's two parties involved. But the fact of the matter is, if somebody wants to fight you a war, you have to participate. I'm not talking again. There's situations like we talk about the Nazis or the Hitler, or we have extreme situations where clearly one party is absolutely aggressive, violent, criminal. You can't say in a case where somebody comes and mugs you, God forbid, or sticks a gun to your head, that you're a participant because, and if you were just like diplomatic, things would work out. It doesn't work exactly as Neville Chamberlain discovered in the 30s. As Churchill said, appeasement is feeding the crocodiles in the hope you'll be eaten last. So appeasement in the context of diplomacy and appeasement in the context of a clear enemy, it can be foolishness, it can be idiocy. But I'm talking about more in the normal course of life, the battles that we encounter and so on. So this concept of Kabbalah Dal means that it's not all about you, that there's something greater than you are. And that, as you'll see in a moment, is the root of the greatest healing and growth a person can come to. I sometimes refer to it in this class as the idea of bittul, the B-I-T-T-U-L, a combination of modesty, humility. Really, those words are not enough. Humility and modesty is more anova, an onav, or when you say bittul, and especially in Hasidic terminology, it refers to the idea of suspending yourself in the presence of something higher than yourself. If a person is not able to do that, that is, you can point that to the root of most of our problems. Which is why avodah zarah, idolatry, is such a great sin. People ask the question, why is idolatry considered one of the 3 sins you're supposed to die for? Mela, murdering someone, shvichas damim. So before you murder someone else, you have to die. If someone says to you, if you don't kill that person, you'll be killed. You have no right to kill another. Kila arayis, incest. Of course, if someone puts a gun to you and said, perform incest, you have to die before you do that. Because the damage of that to another is not more powerful than your life. All other mitzvahs, it says, v'chai b'hem, you live, you don't die for them. If someone threatens you, or life is threatened due to, let's say, on Shabbos, or Yom Kippur, there's no other food but to eat pork on Yom Kippur. If it saves a life, that's a mitzvah to eat, not just allowed. Because v'chai, you're supposed to live by the Torah and not die by it. But there's a third sin that says, that's just equated with murder and incest. And that is avodah zarah, which is bowing to an idol or serving an idol. The literal meaning of avodah zarah actually means a strange service. Zarah is strange, which really tells you the real power of it. People usually think of it as in the paganistic context of idolatry, like having a piece of wood or stone that you bow to. That's one form of idolatry. It's not even the major form. So the question is asked, why is that such a grave sin in Torah? A person wants to be foolish and worship the sun and the moon, or wood or stone or some other object, so they want to be foolish. Let them be foolish. Is God jealous of a fool? Of someone who's distorting and trying to attribute divine powers to something that has no power? So why is it such a grave sin? And the answer lies in those words, avodah zarah, because it's not just about an idol, foolishness. It's about a distortion in life itself. You're serving something strange, something wrong. Idolatry essentially is another form of self-worship. You don't feel comfortable worshiping or connecting and surrendering to a God that's invisible, so you find a God on your terms. I could see it. It's a star. It's a shrine. It's a tree. It's an object that I can relate to. And idolatry was very sophisticated. There were many different types of idolatry for different reasons and different causes. You need a God on your terms. That's the root of all problems. Because God said, I created a human being in the divine image, not the other way around, that we humans should create a God in the human image. That's what essentially avodah zarah is. You're creating a God on your terms, so then everything is lost after that. Once there is no God on God's terms, then everything is on your terms. So the next day that idol will be money. It'll be covet, honor. It'll be hurting others because it will be greed. So in a sense, if you think of idolatry in the broadest form, it's essentially, are you going to worship yourself or are you going to worship something higher than yourself? Worshipping something that is an object that you need to see is extension of yourself. It's on your terms, you need to see it. Which may be the reason why God is invisible. To demonstrate that it's not going to be on your terms. You need to see it, to hear it. What is it, a mathematical formula? In the physical world, if we don't see or hear it or taste or touch it or smell it, it doesn't exist. But in the world of truth, since when is truth determined by our senses? Do you apply that also on love? You can't see, hear, taste, touch, or smell love. You could express love with the senses, but love itself? All the most important things in life are invisible. So imagine you'd say, you know what, I can only love, I will only accept love if I can see it. There'd be no love in this world. The whole idea of truth and reality is recognizing there's something beyond you that you're reaching to, not trying to package that which is beyond you into your terms. That's the beauty of reaching to something greater than yourself. If a person doesn't accept that premise, everything else will only be an extension of self-interest. So in the most profound way, Avodah Zarah, in its broadest sense, is like hitting the root. You want to worship something beyond yourself or yourself. When Abraham went on his grand search for God, and he grew up in a home of a pagan, Terach, a home where he saw idol worshippers, and he realized this is not God. He looked for reality. So where do you go? You go out to the nature. He went to the meadows, to the fields, looked up into the heavens, first thought sun and the moon, maybe they're powerful, beyond us. But then he realized the sun sets and the moon sets. So they're also just an extension of this universe. But many don't know what was the end of his journey. Like what did he come to discover? So Maimonides, in a very beautiful way, describes in the beginning of the laws of Avodah Zarah in his book of laws. If you ever want to read it, it's a very interesting description how the devolution, can you call it devolution? The opposite of evolution. Of how things decelerated and turned into what we call idol worship, worshiping yourself. So he describes Abraham and Abraham's search. What did Abraham finally discover? Abraham discovered the following. Interesting thing, he discovered a whole new reality. He realized his whole premise was false. He was going and looking for reality, what some people call God. He knew that it's not his father and his mother who were just like himself, or the objects and that people were worshipping. He knew it wasn't the sun and the moon were just an extension of the universe. What happened? After a process of elimination, he came to realize that his premise is wrong. He exists, and he thinks he's going to define reality. Maybe it's the other way around. He has to stop being and allow reality to find him. Because think of it in mathematical terms. The part of a whole does not dictate the whole dictates the part. If I, Abraham said to himself, am a part of a bigger reality, how could the part ever define the whole? It's ludicrous to think that way. I have to, in a sense, suspend my whole, which is my part, which is bittul, the Kabbalah I'm describing, shut everything down, stop this searching, and let another reality emerge. And that's when God appeared to him. As the Kotzker Rebbe said, where's God? They asked him as a child. He said, wherever you let him in. Because reality is reality whether you like it or not, and whether you see it or not. And if you want a reality based on what you see, you basically want a reality on your terms. Reality is not defined by you or by me because we are parts of the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is not just a sum of the parts. Who knows what it contains? It may contain things we will never fathom, being one little speck of it. It's when we let go, that's when it enters. Now, I remember once discussing this at this class. Since the Olympics are going on, I'll say this as Asgacha Pratis. I discussed this around 8 years ago to be exact. There was Olympics then as well. Where was it? Wherever. Madrid. And there was an actual Olympic athlete here in the class. He was in gymnastics, a Jewish guy. And when I was discussing this, he came over to me afterwards and he said to me, what you're saying, the words you just used, and I described Abraham, what I just said, is exactly what he had won a medal, as a matter of fact. And he says, this is what we were taught when we were in training. What people are known, you probably know this expression, to be in the zone. So athletes will train years and years for the moment that they could be in the zone. But you cannot do anything to get yourself in the zone. All you can do is prepare. And then there comes a moment, or more than a moment, where you get into that place, and then you can do magic. But you may need 20, 30 years of training to get to a place like that. This is the confidence that you build in times that you think people in the moment of a real competition, where everything's on the line. Just your nerves can destroy all your talent. But that's getting into the zone. You learn how to do it through training. And writers will tell you the same thing, and artists. Everyone will say one and the same thing. When you're in the zone, what happens is you stop thinking about yourself and your nerves. You become a channel for something else that's not you. Everyone will tell you this equivalent. Football players, to Olympic athletes, to mystics. As soon as you feel yourself, you can no longer accomplish the greatest, because you're in the way. You cannot sense yourself. So you become a channel and you feel something else is flowing through you. What is flowing through you? A power that's greater than you are, that you trained yourself to be able to channel. That's really what it comes down to. Now this is the ultimate words, a bit of humility. This doesn't mean every athlete that says this is humble. We all have that challenge. You can be arrogant most of your life, but it's a symbol and a type of like a taste of what it's like. In that moment, there is definitely a certain type of complete suspension of self. And that's when you achieve greater than anything yourself could achieve. And if anybody here has ever been in that type of zone, you know what kind of gift it is. When you're there, it's undeniable. And you're not even conscious of it when you're there, because that would, of course, defeat the purpose. You only realize it later that you feel, you're not there. Because you know you're there, so to speak. And to just give a small example, this is an example from Hasidic texts. Like if I were to ask you now, what is your left leg doing? So now you're all going to think about it. But what was it doing before you thought about it? It was alive, it was in a particular position, but you didn't have to sense it for it to be real. The illusion that we have in our minds that we have to get over is that you think you have to sense it for it to exist. It's not true. As soon as you sense it, as a matter of fact, it becomes much weaker than when you don't sense it. Because it's not about us. Something is real not because you experience it. What does health feel like? If anyone can tell me the answer to that, I can tell you you're not that healthy. Why? Because health doesn't feel like anything. As soon as you feel something, you know there's something wrong. Health is supposed to not feel like anything. It just flows through you. A life force that flows through you. You're alive. If you feel your finger or your toe or any part of you, there's a sign of pain or something's wrong. It's a pulse or something else is happening. It doesn't mean necessarily it's dangerous, but it's definitely not a pure flow. Health is really a free-flowing force through you that is really invisible to you. And as soon as you become too focused or visible, it's not a great sign. Of course you can think about it, but as soon as you think about it, it's no longer the experience itself. All true experiences are like that. Now the problem here is we are so seduced by our senses, the need to control through our senses, that it's very hard to bring ourselves to a place like this. And this is what Abraham discovered, and everything changed after that, because he didn't just discover it. When he got to that zone, and God emerged through him, he realized the consequences. And it says that he committed not only himself but his children and his family, Beisei Achra, to follow this path of God. And as the years passed, the God emerged even more, to the point where God actually instructed and told him things and told his children. And the Torah really was just a gift that came out of through Moses and through a people that allowed God to emerge through them. Had they not allowed that, it would never have emerged. In other words, we're the ones that can block God out, or you can let God in. So to go back to the theme I was discussing about blind spots, the only way you can get beyond blind spots is to get beyond yourself. As long as you exist and you think you're going to get beyond the blind spots, you will never get there. I don't know who it was that said it. I think it was one of the, I think it was James. He said that happiness will elude anyone that focuses on trying to get happiness. Now, a lot of people resist hearing when they hear that. They can't stand hearing that because they're spending half their life trying to get happiness. Who wants to find out that you're doing everything wrong? Because you see, happy people are the people who never focused on it. They're so in the zone of living that's why they're happy. As soon as you start focusing on yourself and your needs, but we live in a world of commodity, and everything about advertising and everything about commercialism is about filling needs. Now, I'm not suggesting we don't have needs, but the healthiest way to satisfy a need is not becoming aggressively pursuing the need. It's about letting go and allowing certain things to come through you. Now, this itself requires a good mentor to tell you when to do which. Obviously, there are times you have to go out there and really be aggressive. But the deepest truths in life, the deepest happiness, is when you let go. To let go is the single hardest thing in life, and is why we have a Tisha B'Av in the first place, because the Jews became arrogant and they took for granted the great temple they had. So as great as they were, as great as the divine revelation there, it no longer had that type of mystique. It became too common. And therefore, in a way, when something so special is so close to you, and you don't break yourself to accept it, you don't have that type of bittul, it's forced upon us, and the temple was broken instead. So being broken in life sometimes is not a justification, it's sometimes a reminder that you didn't break yourself enough. So therefore, when you get broken, you can't do anything with it. A person is an expression that says, bittul kenish batul ver. A person who is able to surrender and suspend themselves, because they suspend themselves, nothing can really destroy them. Because they know how to suspend themselves before something has to destroy you. Only an entity can be destroyed, not an entity that's in the zone of channeling something greater than itself. Did everybody follow that? Think about that, because that is a big secret of life. So when we talk about finding a mentor or finding someone that can help you get beyond yourself, it begins the other way around, really. You have to get beyond yourself. The salvation of getting beyond blind spots and mistakes is really coming to a point where you have to realize that you may not have it right, and it's not about you. There's a bigger picture, and you have to start asking the question, what is your mission that you were sent to this earth? What are you needed for? Not what you need. What are you needed for? And when you begin to think in those terms, most problems begin to become resolvable. It's not automatic, but it's the beginning of the process. So that's why the cycle of life, as I was discussing, the wheel, has its ups and downs. If it didn't, we would never get to a point like this. If we were always on the top of the wheel and it never circled, what do you think would happen? You'd become consumed with yourself and you think you deserved it. This is me now. I'm here on top. Self-made man. Keichi v'etzim yadi. I did it all myself. And the same humility, by the way, is required when you're in the bottom of the wheel. There are people who say, listen, I'm just cursed. I don't deserve it. And I knew my mother always told me that. Now I'm sure. And that's also arrogance. Who are you to determine what your destiny is? Since when is it up to you? The understanding and acceptance that the life is a wheel is really a form of bittul. It's a way of surrendering or accepting that there's more to life than you think. That the wheel turns. Just don't stop it through your attitude. Because you can. The wheel can continue turning in your life, but your attitude can be so depressing. You remain below. You remain on the bottom because that's what you decided where you want to remain. You write your own script. And the same thing is in many different situations. Can that happen when you're on top? Well, not really. That's the problem. It doesn't. But the point is that the cycle that we talk about, Tisha B'Av, and going into greater days, leading all the way into the high holidays, is really an opportunity for us, for all of us, to ride on this calendar. Maybe this is a good time to begin, a good time to be introspective and come to a point where, you have to go back to your purest place. Because this is ultimately what it comes down to. This isn't about just suspending yourself. It's suspending what part of yourself that is distorted. If you can go back to realize that there's the purest part of who you are. We all respond when someone tells you something that is a childhood memory that you have a pleasant memory about. There's something very profound about that. because it brings you back to a pure place. It's critical in this process to connect to purest things in your life. If you can find the most sacred moment of your life, or you can have someone help you find that, it helps bring you to a place of the zone that I'm describing. Because you'll see those sacred moments are not about you. They were about an experience that just flowed through you. So I think one of the suggestions I would make would be that it's vital to reach a point where you can suspend, or where you can get beyond, if you want to get beyond your own blind spots, beyond your own, is to stop being so aggressive in the search, and maybe go back to almost like a childlike innocence, where, the expression Kabbalah sel, bittul, children have that naturally. They're natural listeners. They're natural obedient. They naturally trust until they're hurt. So we all have that part of ourselves. We just have to find environments where we can have that ability. I don't think there's anyone that I've ever met, and I'm sure anyone in this room, that if you were able to find an environment that was completely warm and trusting, that you knew that you would not be judged, like back to a place where you're completely nurtured and loved, that would be something that you would not want to experience. Because it's in those environments when you can really cultivate what I just described, the type of letting go. We can't let go because we live in a world where we think, or maybe true, is a hostile world. Wherever you turn, there are predators. If I let go, I'll be hurt. And it's very true. This could be in the marketplace, in business, even friends. Throw money into the equation and almost inevitable there'll be somewhere someone backstabbing someone. Even people who you thought you can trust. The competition. In family structures, this spills over due to unhealthy or insecure family structures where children are pitted against each other or whatever the situation is. So wherever you turn, we're living in a hostile environment. So it's vital not just to find the mentor, it's almost the other way around, to find environments where you can find some type of comfort. Now, if you can't do that in the month of Elul, and Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, when exactly are you going to do it? That's why I find it so sad that you go into many synagogues and they don't feel like houses of God. These are houses of human beings, each one exercising their political and partisan control. You have boards, and you have rabbis, and you have, it's a power game, which is why I personally chose never to become a pulpit rabbi. You never say never, but so far so good. Because I just abhorred seeing that, and I don't want to be involved in that. Not here to criticize any synagogues. It's just the structure, I guess, of what happens between boards and rabbis and who's in control and stuff like that. And God really doesn't exist much in many synagogues, I have to be honest with you. Since I'm not saying names, you could always think the synagogues that you feel are good, are great, and it's maybe all the other synagogues.
Kabbalah said the same thing.
The Baal Shem Tov said once, he came into a town, and he asked where he can daven, where he can pray. And they pointed to him. This is the largest synagogue. So he goes to the door, and it's full of Jews, and you can hear them praying and yelling and screaming and everything. Baal Shem Tov walks in, and he runs right out. He says, no, it's not a place for him. It's too crowded. They say, what, that's a problem? Baal Shem Tov is disturbed by being a crowded synagogue. You're praying to God, not to, who cares how crowded it is. So he says, no, it's not crowded with people, it's crowded with prayers. They're not going anywhere. They're all stuck in the room. Because it says in the Zohar that a prayer needs wings, like a bird needs wings to fly. Ava v'yira is the right wing and the left wing. And when you pray lip service, and people's egos and everything else is in control, and there's no ava, which is love of God, and awe of God, bittul basically, so the prayer remains grounded like rounded birds. So he couldn't go in, he couldn't breathe. It was so suffocating from the prayers. There's such great prayers, they don't go anywhere. Whether it's a true story or not, they tell about Pavarotti once doing his rendition of the Hashem, Lord is my shepherd, Tehillim, Psalm 23, and the whole place was mesmerized and wow, unbelievable. And everyone gave him a standing ovation. After the ovation for a few minutes, everyone sat down. One old Jew remained standing, and he started saying Tehillim like a good old Jew says Tehillim. In Hebrew, Jewish way. And the whole place started crying. So Pavarati asked him later and said, why is it when I said that everyone gave me a standing ovation, and when you said everybody was crying? He said, because you may know the psalm, but I know the shepherd. So, there's saying prayers, lip service, or even if you know the meaning. And then there's, prayer is tefillah melashon teifel. It means to connect to something greater than yourself. It's not about you. In learning Torah, it can be about you, and that's why Torah needs tefillah. The study needs prayer for the humility part. You need both. Each has its advantage. Doesn't mean Torah also nafshi kafel kalti. Even when you study Torah, it also has to be introduced with humility. But in Torah, because you're using your mind, it's inevitable that your ego in some way is going to be involved, and maybe it's even healthy. Your mind, you argue, you have an argument. In prayer, however, it's Avodah Shabalev, is the service of the heart. And the service of the heart is about suspension. It's about emoting to something greater than yourself. It's about loving God, basically. That means something outside of you. Like all love is about beyond yourself, not about you. It's not about extension of yourself. So, we have a dilemma. You have Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur coming, and as I said, I know many people have real difficulties, especially spiritual people. People are looking for spirituality. It's one thing you go out of guilt, responsibility, You say people who don't have parents, God forbid, they say Yusker, or whatever it is on the high holidays. Everybody has some awakening. I think sometimes to myself, why the Arizal and the Baal Shem Tov and all the great mystics always prayed outside. They never prayed inside of synagogues. Maybe because the man-made walls was too much containment. The Chadaydi was set in the field. And I remember when we did a camping Shabbaton, which was out in the field. Yeah, so we built a tent. But it had a power to it that man-made structures simply don't have. Man-made structures will never give you plush cushions. And you can have a name tag there, and it can look very, feel very comfortable. But there's something about being exposed to the elements that's very natural. Abraham prayed in the field, so did Isaac. They didn't have structures then. So I'm not suggesting we should demolish the synagogue structures, God forbid. So there's an element of type of, but maybe it's a lesson for us how we have to transform our environments. So I'll say this, since we are now, as I said, in the days coming from Tisha B'Av and entering into the one of the most powerful days of the year, though it's an unknown, and it's equated with Yom Kippur. Interestingly, with Yom Kippur. These are also the days, remember, that Moses is on the mountain. If you follow the book I've done on 60 days, the spiritual guide to the high holidays. So there Moses goes up on the mountain, Shavuos, 6th of Sivan, 6th or 7th of Sivan, and he receives the 10 Commandments, tablets, spends 40 days, and comes back, sadly, to the Jewish people building a golden calf. Idolatry, as I mentioned. Self-worship. And he breaks the tablets. And I've discussed this many times in this class, so I'm not going to get into it now. That's the 17th of Tammuz, the beginning of the 3 weeks, just to show you how the cycle works. The Jews leave Egypt. 50 days later, they receive the Torah. 40 days later, Moses breaks the tablets after they built the golden calf. Beginning of the 3 weeks, the sad 3 weeks, which later the temple would be destroyed. 3 weeks later is Tisha B'Av. What happens after he breaks the tablets? Moses returns to the mountain to pray for forgiveness, but he's not successful. It says these are days of wrath, because God says, no, I will not forgive them. 40 days Moses spends. On Tisha B'Av, where was Moses? He was on the mountain, praying for the people, but to no avail. And he continues to be on the mountain now, still in a sense sad days, which come to an end, when? The end of this month of Av. The end of the sad month of Av, Moses comes down, unsuccessful. But Moses, being Moses, does not give up. You know what he does next? He goes up on the mountain a third time. Rosh Chodesh he goes up. Different opinions, the first day, the second day, but he goes up on the new moon of Elul. And because and he begins to pray, and this time 40 days later will become Yom Kippur, when he will descend successfully. Salachti kidvarecha. We'll discuss this more as we get closer to these days, but it just shows you the cycle. And these days, therefore, but then the third period of 40 days becomes what we call Yemei Rachamim. These are days of compassion, because that's when the chapter Kisisa in Torah, where Moses speaks to God, show me your face, and all happened the third series of days, is when Moses finally invokes God's compassion, and we have the power to do the same. And all this comes only after there was rejection. It didn't begin. It took Moses 40 days to receive the Torah, but it took him 80 days to receive hope and forgiveness. And it's all part of a process. Because God did not reject him because he just wanted to reject him. It's part of the cycle as well. We'll discuss this some more, as I said, we go along. So I want to say good news, as I shared last week, and this week I brought this along. And I feel very good about it in a personal way, because I've dealing with a frustration that many have come to me. And I'm not suggesting I'm the only person that can do this. I think every good rabbi should do this. But I will, thank God, be leading the high holiday services this year in New York. I've done it out of New York quite a few times, but in New York. So if anyone, it's not yet open to the public registration, because we're still working on the web, etc., to get it available. But since you're such loyal attendees here, and I feel kindred bonding with you all, I brought along I asked my office to just print out some pre-registration. It will, I'm not saying this to toot any horn, but it will probably be sold out. So I suggest, if you are planning to come, you have an opportunity now to come on, and we made some incentives, early bird incentives, etc., etc. We're going to do the services Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and it'll be very personalized. You'll have a chazan. Anyone that wants to follow the traditional will be followed, but I will personally guide and direct and personalize the service that it should really be. And I say this not just for people who don't read Hebrew. Frankly, those that do read Hebrew, if they're a little honest, and I'm one of them, the Marzur, to follow the Marzur, especially Yom Kippur, it's hundreds of pages. And though it's beautiful and we believe God hears it all, it's not so easy to understand all the meanings of everything. Actually, when I worked on 60 days and I had to explain it to others, I had to dig deeper. So sometimes doing it by rote doesn't necessarily mean you're better at it. It just means it's a habit. So I'm going to try to do it in a way that balances all this together, brings out the richness of the traditional part, of course, without at the same time making anyone comfortable that comes. It's it will be in a comfortable environment, and I shall be there. So if you're looking for something like this, I am doing, the host of the synagogue is not us directly, it's a synagogue, but they've made it very available to me. I made it very clear that if they want me to do it, I need to have the flexibility to run it properly. But I am thankful to their hosting it. It's the 6th Street Community Synagogue, which is a beautiful place actually. It's like a wooden place. It seats around close to 700. But it's very intimate, and I like the whole environment, so I felt it comfortable to do it. And even though it may sound like a lot, it's not about mass production. It's about intimate and personal, and hopefully I'll be able to do that. And as I said, I welcome you all. If you'd like to have a place for meals, we're doing the meals as well there. So it's all here on this paper. So if you want to pass this around, we'll take a few and pass it this way if anybody wants. If you want to share it with friends, as I said, it's not yet. You can share it with anyone, but it's not yet available to the broader public. It will be in the next little while. I'm not sure, in the next few days probably. And by all means, if anybody needs lodging or that, we're also going to show availability that people can find things around there. But I feel, as I said, very honored to do it, because I've always led classes that lead up to the high holidays, and here I have the opportunity to actually do it on the main show, so to speak. So meanwhile, even though it's not 15th of Av yet, I hope the rabbis in this room will be allowed to say that I wish everybody a Ksiv V'Chsim Teva. Is that right? I'm wishing that we will have a very blessed year. And it all begins, as I said, it's born in these days. So in the low points of life are the highest points are born. So thank you everyone again, the web audience as well. And good evening. Until next Wednesday night. I should also add, as I said, we are going to develop a whole bunch of programs at this space as well. That's the synagogue part. There's a whole downstairs that's going to be, we're renovating now and turning it into a whole environment. So stay tuned. I will do some things here, but the regular class will be moving. Not just the class, there'll be other things moving.
The class will be
yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. 6th Street. East Village. You'll get more details. I'll let you all know. Let's put it this way. If it's worth coming here, it'll be worth coming there. Everyone have a very good evening, and it was a pleasure.